Hi, and welcome to RealClearFetish Talks RealClearPlay, a podcast that dives into kink and sober life and everything in between. This week we are talking to Rock. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. Not enjoying the weather at all. It's horrible.
Full storm coming.
Like with every episode I do, I start with four standard questions and then we'll just see where we go from there.
Okay, sounds good to me.
What do you prefer I call you? Names, pronouns, and title.
Rock, he, him.
Any
I don't-
titles?
No titles for me.
No
No.
titles. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm an academic on one side. I'm a porn performer on the other side. I'm a bodybuilder as well. And I am a husband, I guess. So we've got a little square of things that often do not touch in many people's lives.
Mm.
I am all of these.
And they all intertwine.
They all intertwine, and I am the intersection of a few things that, especially a lot of my friends who don't know anything about porn or the straight friends, find absolutely fascinating.
Well, we'll dive into that a little bit more further along. Completely sober, clear-headed, or social drinker?
Completely sober, yes.
And what is clear play to you and why is it important?
Clear play to me is important because it allows me to be myself now. To be perfectly honest, it was through sober play that I discovered my sexuality. That's definitely the truth. Before it was a mess, it was a mix, it was everything. And I only really discovered who I was and who I am and what I like
Mm.
after sobriety. So it's everything. Yes.
It's the cornerstone of your sexuality, really.
Yes, it is. It is. It made me who I am, which it does in many cases, but in the way of sexuality, it allowed me to be me and to explore what I want and what I don't want in a way that is far more expressive than I ever would have been before, shall we say, before sobriety. Yes.
You're now how long sober?
I am 1 year, 9 months, 1 year, 9 months now.
Fantastic. So what brought you to let's start from the start. How did you get introduced to drugs and where culminated into you making the decision to stop?
Okay, so growing up, rural life in England, it is very common in teenagers to be exposed to drugs, I think.
Mm.
It seems to be, for some reason, well, for many reasons, far more common for us rural kids to have been exposed to hardcore drugs before many of the city kids, from my experience of going off to university. So as an undergrad, that would continue on, and I snorted everything I could get hold of, and then that became a necessity through my 20s. And that's what was driving me forward to do things, was to be able to make the money to buy the cocaine and to go forward. And that's what was happening. That's what I can see is was the direction that my life was going for my into my late 20s. And it culminated with me being very lonely, very, very, very ill. I was still functioning at work. I was still able to turn up, but only just. Disciplinaries were happening. I'm a
Mm.
landscape architect in this phase of my life, and I was running a couple of projects, some quite exciting projects designing. And I ended up just being taken back and put on the back seat and put as an assistant designer because I just couldn't handle the decisions. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it. So all I could think about was what when Friday was going to come around, and then it would be an absolute blur, blink of the eye,
Mm.
and I would be so ill on Monday morning, and that would continue on week in, week out, and then it started during the week and multiple times a week. So it got to a point where I needed to I needed to have help. I needed to get help from anyone, but I didn't know where to go to. And I thought I could just stop by myself, as is the first step, really. and you realize that you can't, so you need the help. And that's where I discovered NA, and I was taken by a friend, which I am incredibly grateful for because I would never ever have gone on my own.
Mm,
I'm autistic, and I know that now. I didn't know that at the time, but it all makes complete sense. Walking into a meeting full of people in a situation in a format that I had no idea what to do. I wanted to just leave immediately, and I considered many, many times throughout my first meeting. I was giving me goosebumps now thinking about it because I was shaking. One, I was shaking because I was on a very bad come down, but also just because I did not know what I was doing. But it was the first time I ever said, I'm an addict out loud. And
mm,
it was a penny dropping moment. Before, I hadn't ever said those words or thought those words about myself. I thought, oh, I need help, but I didn't think I'm an addict. And that was a big step mentally. To say those or to call myself that was a very big step. And I went through the whole thing. I started talking. I was encouraged to talk. I would never ever have talked really. It was
mm,
quite a small group, so therefore I was talking, and I talked about why I was there. I can't remember a single word I said, but I walked out afterwards and I had a panic attack just as I was leaving, the first time in my life ever, because it was such an emotional moment, everything coming together that I knew I needed help. This is the place where I get help. It's a group of people who I have never seen and never spoken to before, and I just bared my soul in the rawest way that I've ever done in my life. And I couldn't take it. I had to sit in my car and I just couldn't breathe. I didn't know what was happening. Never experienced a panic attack before. And now I know after having many more through through sobriety, the first few months of sobriety and having to deal with all the emotions again and to feel the panic attacks came hard then.
mm.
But there on that first day was the turning point, and it was. And I managed to keep sobriety going for a few months before a relapse, but it was that's the point I remember. Very similar weather to today, a bit miserable, dark, early, cold. But it was the start. That night was the start of my life.
Yeah, it's funny when you're telling that story. I remember going to my first meeting after the right mess that was my using, which was my first psychosis in drug taking, and I was taken by a friend to my first NA meeting and my first CMA meeting in the same week. And I fully agree with you, the power of kind of just admitting defeat and admitting that you need help and you are an addict. There is so much power in that. And like you, I was getting goosebumps when you were talking about it because it just reminded me of my first time going into those rooms, and how powerful it could be.
Yeah, and how vulnerable you are. Even you are in as an addict before, you're in the most ridiculous, vulnerable situations, but you don't think you are. That's the
Mm,
thing. You think you've got control over something, and then as soon as you're in those rooms, you are extremely vulnerable, and so is everyone else, and that's the power of that. Is the fact that everyone is in a situation that does not happen really in society in life much.
mm,
You are in a place where everyone is vulnerable and there for you as well. We're all
mm.
there for each other. So it was very new feeling for me to be in a situation like that. And it's powerful, as you say, yes.
Yeah. So you say you found your sexuality in sobriety. So what was your sex life like when you were still using?
Non-existent, absolutely
Non-existent.
non-existent. I was incredibly horny, but the way I got into a habit of my using cycles would be I would be at home in a very bad state using toys on myself
Mm,
because my big kink is fisting, and being fist bottom is just the best sensation in the world in my opinion. And it's something that I would latch onto when I was high, and I would play with toys, be insatiable, absolutely insatiable, and then full of shame when the next day came, full of
Mm.
shame, absolutely
Yeah.
full of shame. And I never met people. I never met anyone, even though this is all the porn that I've watched all my life. I'd been in a very isolated relationship before where I wasn't allowed to explore that kink. It was very vanilla, and I don't know why I stayed in it for such a long time, but I guess I felt safe, and also I was able to use in that relationship, so that's why I stayed there. But once that ended, I didn't want to meet any new people, especially not people who I felt close to already. So I would maybe start an evening or start getting high with friends, and then within a couple of hours, all I wanted to do was just be on my own, always.
Mm.
So I would take it home. But then when sobriety happened, I still had these same feelings. I still had the same kinks. But I was like, God, well now I literally can't meet anyone ever because everyone's high.
Mm.
So I felt very isolated, but it was serendipity that it was at that time I met some people who encouraged me into filming. And I was at a point in my life where I didn't have much to lose and I didn't really think much of it. And I was just like, do you know what? Why not? I think I'll probably be quite good on camera. And this is a way of exploring BDSM, which was my first ever shoot was BDSM with a good friend now, a very good friend. And I'd wanted to meet with him for years. And when I was high in my previous days, I had booked flights to go over and see him, which I never would have gotten when I was sober, ever,
Mm.
ever. But now there was the chance of like, well, okay, we'll do it for this. We'll do it for filming. You don't have to show your face, but you can still partake in everything.
Mm.
And the reason why it was such an epiphany for me was because I've always felt uneasy with developing the okay, well, it's autism now looking back. It's one of the ways that I have been all my life. It's felt uncomfortable with, oh, so what happens next here? Are
Mm.
we going to kiss? Do we move to foreplay here? When do we start this? What are we going to do next?
Yeah.
Because my life had been very sheltered before, I wasn't exposed to any protocol. But filming was my first foray into structured play. And that is still such a gift, in my opinion, because I know what's going to happen. I know what's expected of me, and I can let myself be free in that moment. And I know that it is for my pleasure. I am safe. The other person is safe. The construct of it being filmed and it being porn being created was the thing that allowed me to explore my sexuality. So from that first filming session, which was the most depraved BDSM, it was just it was just fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And I did things that I've always wanted to do, always wanted to do. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I was stone cold sober for the first time ever, was enjoying myself sexually sober. And it was just very strange. I remember walking back across to the hotel I was staying in London, and I was thinking to myself, what am I meant to feel right now? I have just had an experience which has been what the porn that I've wanked to all my life has been made of, and I've just experienced that firsthand. I should feel as I used to always feel. I should feel disgusted in myself, but I didn't, and I just had a massive grin on my face, just walking along, just full of serotonin and just really happy. Ended up going to sleep. This was also the first time I'd been to London since I started my sober journey. So I was only a month sober then. So I was terrified of being back in London, which is where I was used to, well, where I started. Really the downward spiral. So I still had all the numbers in that. So I was, a month into sobriety. I was trying, but I still had reservations, and I know that I see this now because I hadn't deleted the dealer's numbers yet off my phone.
Mm.
So I still had all of that, but because of the feelings that I was feeling after this first session, I just fell straight asleep and woke up in the morning and felt fantastic again. So that was a huge, huge turning point. And it was really, really formative for my journey going forward. And I think I'm very lucky in that as well. And I do recognize that I am lucky because that first clear play was very good. So therefore, I was not having to work against any negative feelings. And I thought, okay, I can do this.
That's amazing. It's I think always like when I started recovery because my addiction was centered in chemsex and it was I think it was rarely on my own, but also extremely lonely because people just sit on their phone the whole time, really. With me, sex took a long time to relearn because it was so intertwined with all that. Deprived session. You need to give me a bit more details. What happened in this session?
So there was me and Teddy Bryce, and we were handcuffed behind our backs, I think, dildo shoved down each of us throats, and Sir Joshua was pushing our heads closer and closer down through the dildo until we kissed, and we had two ends of the dildo right down deep throat, vomiting up over each other, being slapped in the face while this was happening, tears down my face, thinking, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I was rock hard, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. It was just a series of feelings that I'd never had in my life. And then the scene would change, and that would be the thing. So this would be getting too much, too intense, too intense. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I'm going to be sick. I am being sick. There is sick dribbling down my face, but the dildo is still going in and out, and I'm loving it. I'm loving it. But it's too much. It's too much. And then Sir Joshua would say, "Okay, let's have a break then, boys." And I'd be like, "Thank you, sir." And I remember thinking just like, am I meant to be crying right now or am I meant to be laughing? Because it was such a strange feeling that I think I probably just had a blank face by that point because I just was lost it. These were very short filming sessions. There were maybe about 10 minutes of play each time. So that
Mm,
was a very good introduction to this, back into it. Like I say, because before there were years that went by where I thought I was asexual because I had no want to touch anyone else. That was not a part of my sexuality. It was all about the feelings on me. That's what I wanted.
mm,
Um, and that had something to do with the cocaine that I was using all the time. It was something to do with me just being was cutting off, and I just wanted to be drunk and high on my own
mm,
and not interact with anyone else. So this being forced into such an extreme situation straight away was the thing that released so many other feelings, so many other stress responses, and just so much adrenaline that I was able to go around. And then we moved into some fisting. And by that point, I was completely open to anything in all ways. And that was a real shock as well, because I thought that because I'm not drunk and I'm not high, I'm going to be tight. I'm going to be
mm,
or I'm just, it's going to take forever because I didn't have poppers as well. That was, that was something that my sponsor was very strict about.
mm,
Obviously, poppers, when you're fisting, are the tool everyone uses. Absolutely everyone uses poppers, or so I thought. And this, again, a day of first, this was the first day that I'd ever been fisted without poppers. And I was just shocked how it just went straight in. Shocked, absolutely shocked. And then it's been the same ever since, and that's what I love. But I it was like I say, it was just a formative day that I look back and I'm obviously smiling on because I do. But
Oh,
it
I can tell on your facial expression. There's almost euphoric callback on it.
yeah, there really is. It's fantastic. And it was funny because on my wedding day to Phil, we had Sir Joshua come and witness the wedding as well. And it was just quite fun. My mum was there and was just like, oh, so how did you two meet? And just like
Well, is that old chestnut of a story? Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Oh, fantastic. So you mentioned your husband Phil.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you met him and when did you get married?
I met Phil, so this would be about sort of maybe about 6 months into my filming career. I jumped headlong into this because how I say how this made me feel. So before this, I'd had a desk job. I was depressed. I was an addict, and it all happened at the same time where I got sobriety and into porn. And I realized that I can make a load of money at this. I can do this is quite good. I've run a business before, so I know the whole business side of it.
Mm,
And I just went, I just did it. I filmed with many people who were the people who I used to wank to. And when I used to have a message from a porn star saying like, "Oh, I'd really love to film with you," from someone who I've known for like 10 years through the internet,
mm,
I would never have thought that this person was going to talk to me. So I was going all over the place, going to Barcelona and then to New York and all over. And then I remember I was in New York and I was messaging. No, I wasn't. I was in London at this point, on a trip because I lived in Sheffield and I'd come down to London very often to film and then go back home, come back. And I was in London and I was organizing with Phil James filming. So it was the day before I went to New York, and I was incredibly stressed. I had to do all of my washing from 2 weeks of being in London before going for 3 weeks to New York, and I had to do this 1 day turnaround in Sheffield,
mm.
get everything ready, get the heating turned off, get everything sorted for a 3 week holiday, and film with Phil. So also, my car broke down that day as well. I do remember that, which was I was driving back to London. There was just a massive thing of black smoke out the back of the car, and then I managed to get home, but there was just black smoke the whole way, the whole A1. So that was into the garage as well. And like I say, I had about 12 hours to sort all of this shit out. And Phil came in, and it was just ridiculous. It was just like a little cheeky chappy. He's only about comes up to about here on me, and and we filmed and we had a very very intimate filming which we have watched back over since because you can see immediately a connection within the eyes.
Mm.
And yeah, it was we finished and we both fell about laughing. um Vanilla sex, very standard, just easy for the OnlyFans, this was no kink, no nothing. And then off he went back to Liverpool, and I carried on my day, went to New York, and then we messaged every single day. And then within 3 months, we'd moved in together. And then 9 months, 8 months later, we got married because it just felt completely right. And now we live together on our little farm in the Peak District, which you must
Yeah.
come visit one day.
Well, it's a miserable day everywhere. I can literally hear the rain hitting my window at the moment. It's ridiculous. So you got married and now you're living on a farm.
Yes, we are. We're living on a farm. And do you know one thing about living on a farm is that you're able to, or I at least, am able to let down my guard and really enjoy play sessions. And that's something that has only happened since I've been living on the farm because I've always in the back of my mind, just a little bit conscious about noise with the neighbors.
Yeah.
That's been one of the really big benefits of moving out here. And I would highly recommend it if anyone has the chance to just go to a farm or somewhere isolated and detached with a bit of space between the next person to really have a very good fisting session.
You could be as loud as you want.
Yes. Yes, you
Uh,
can.
Have you set up a filming space at the farm?
There's a small shed outside, and this is what we're doing, but unfortunately it's on the side of a public right of way, and it's a popular one. So often we'll think, oh, let's go outside to the sling, which we've got set up out there. And then some old lady is walking her dog from the next village on the circular route that goes past that shed. And by past, I mean like within about that much space of the shed. So there's no windows on it as well, so you can't see out, which is fine, which adds to the whole thing. But it's just this goes back to my point of it being I'm always conscious of something around. So therefore we keep it in the house. And one thing I'm absolutely loving at the moment is being in front of a log burning stove on all fours or head down, ass in the air, and just feeling the warmth of it on you while you're being fisted is a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
You could do a very Christmas themed fisting video with that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, maybe an Advent series.
Yes, trying different toys every day. That sounds fantastic. It's quite mind-blowing what happens sometimes when people go into sobriety and things just happen. And it's just
Yeah.
feels like a lot of things just lined up for you. And that's absolutely amazing. So, what is the craziest experience you've had with doing your porn?
The craziest experience would be, well, I guess it would be performing in Berlin, I guess. That was hard. That was really hard from a sober point of view. So I've I managed to avoid going. Well, no, I didn't manage to avoid. I couldn't go back to clubs. That's something I'm still trying to do 2 years later down the line, and I've been inside clubs 3 or 4 times now, and 3 of those 4 times I've had to leave within 20 minutes because there's just too much temptation. The whole bar's there, so I start thinking about drinking, and then as soon as I have one drink, then I want to make an order, and I just
Mm,
can't. It's just too dangerous still. But one day I want to be there at the point, and I get a lot of requests, and I'm missing out really on a lot of work, to be honest. Not doing club nights. Like I could be in Madrid right now, but it's just too risky,
mm.
too risky. But in Berlin on Folsom 2023, I was asked if I wanted to do a live sex show, which I've never done before. I've never done that before. It's always been, as I say, very controlled, very, very, very safe. So the thing that swung it for me was the fact that they were willing to pay for flights from New. I was in New York at the time, as I was saying that story before. It was just after I met Phil, and they said they'll pay for the flights, and I was like, well, I've got to do it. I've got to do it. If I, that's it just adds a lot of stress of me having to book a flight to there and then to Folsom afterwards. I could just get it done in one go.
Yeah.
So that was the reasoning that I thought I could do that. And then when I got there, it was just like my anxiety was just coming up, and I just was just like, I've got to go in an hour, I've got to go in half an hour, I've got to go in 20 minutes. We need to get there. And I was with a good friend of mine, Kinkoa, who's also a performer. And he's also trying sobriety on a way that he wasn't, and isn't an addict, but he's been shown by me, as he said a couple of times, how enjoyable sex and especially fisting is
Mm.
without being high, which I'm really glad about that he said that. But anyway, that's by the by. This was at the start of mine and Kinko's friendship. So he introduced me. We met each other at the hotel, and we're like, right, we need to get this taxi. We need to go. We're performing together, so I felt safe with him, but I had no idea what this club environment was going to be like.
Mm.
And got there, we were told we had to mingle, which is just my worst nightmare, absolute worst nightmare. It was strange because there were people getting high around me, people snorting all sorts of things, people asking if I wanted it. And it just wasn't as stressful as I thought it was going to be because I had a job to do, and I knew I had a job to do. And I think that's what it was. And that, so rather than just going to a club before where I was just like at loose in the wild with everyone, I was there for a reason. So whenever anything happened, I remember very clearly we were in the little performer area and someone said, "Do you want a key?" And that's what got me before my relapses. And I was just like, oh no, not right now, thanks. Just not saying anything, not drawing any attention, just carrying on. And I was so proud of myself. I was so proud of myself, which then let me go into a room full of men, drunk, high, whatever they were, and just get on all fours and put my ass up and just get fisted on stage, completely sober. And then we had a round of applause in a club night at the end, which was just fantastic. I loved it. But it wasn't the wildest thing that I've ever done, but it's one of those things that stuck in my head as a really big milestone.
Mm.
I guess it's funny because I'll look back on this when I'm in my 70s or something, and I was saying like, oh, it wasn't the wildest thing I'd done, getting fisted in front of a club, like, but you know what life's like. It was a very important moment where I realized I have power now. I have power over myself, and I'm able to control myself, but also able to perform on one side and have fun on the other side. And I'm not a slave anymore to drugs.
Slave to
Um,
other people, maybe, but not.
well, yes, a slave to other people, and that's perfectly fine. That's what I say about with my sexuality and with my kink. It has been awakened and it's always made stronger by being sober. And
Mm.
that's the gift that I've had. Now I know that I am on a different path because chemsex was not part of my addiction before. It was it was not using in that sense. And I feel on the one is not meant to compare, but I do feel lucky that I didn't fall into that with alcohol and cocaine because it would have been the end probably. So therefore, like I say, I am able to start rebuilding my sexuality quite quickly and be quite strong in what I want and what I do not like. And that's something that I feel very grateful for, is the fact that I have been shown so many good times sober that they far, far, far outweigh any of the more difficult times, shall we say, sexually. So when it comes to kink and to fisting, it's it's being part of the the fetish community at places like Darklands and like Folsom. And that's where it has been a real eye opener because there are so many guys like us who are sober there. And and that was a shock because I'd been on the edges of these worlds, or on the edges talking to people there, but I would never go myself, never go myself, never have the courage to go myself. But now because of being rock bigs and because of being able to be asked and invited places, and then when I do get there, there's people who I will film with, and I'll feel like I have a purpose and I've got an agenda and I've got things to do.
Mm.
I feel safe and feel prepared to interact with people, interact with anyone who will talk to me if I'm on a good mood, which is always the case at these fetish events. In my opinion, it's a big bunch of geeks like me all together, and that's what I love about the fetish community is that there are so many stories, and there's so much sobriety as well in there that you can feel at home very quickly.
I would say, since I started Real Clear Fetish way back in 17,
Is that when you
I'm
started?
yeah, I started in 2017. Not the podcast. The podcast I started in 2020. But since then, I can see a change because at that time there was no kink and sobriety. Nothing.
What's that? Okay.
Not that I was aware of. I was continuously told in recovery groups that I had to give up my kink because it was too entrenched with drugs. And I'm a stubborn bastard. So I'm just going to create my own way back in. And it worked. But when you talk about your using and it being lonely and being with toys on your own, it's a story I hear a lot. People just end up like, do you know what? I don't want to deal with people when I'm high. So it's there is definitely different categories of what was your using like? Were you doing sexual stuff on your own, or were you doing sexual stuff with other people and not quite knowing what you were doing? It's always interesting seeing the different aspects, and it almost sounds like the sex you have now has been so therapeutic in your sobriety. It's actually benefited you.
Yes, 100%. And I would say that the euphoric feelings of when a fist goes in for the first time, and that feeling of, it's mind blowing, and it's a very difficult feeling to describe to people who haven't had it. But this most similar one is to being high. And it I had replaced, and I recognize that I replaced getting high with being fisted. And I think that's quite healthy. And I'm going to say that's quite healthy, but that's definitely been part of therapy for me. 100%, 100%.
Maybe we should start that out. Fisting therapy with Rock
Yeah.
Big.
Maybe it can be an online session.
Oh yeah, you just talk people through it and it, well, I've mentioned on before episodes I work with a charity called Controlling Chemsex, and one of the things I did for them was to write what to do with kink when you become sober. And there
Hmm.
is a big section about fisting on there, which primarily not some of it is written by me, but also a lot of it is written by a friend of mine who is like his main fetish is fisting.
Yeah.
And the amount of guys he helps become good at fisting sober and how mind-blowing that is. He did never use drugs himself. So he was just like, "Oh, come, you can definitely take a fist even if you're sober," and so on. Because it is something I hear often when people become sober. It's like, "Oh, I will never fist again." It's like you will fist again and it will be even better.
Yes, yes, and that's the thing. And one of the strangest things that I've come across is people who've been sober for years, but have who still use poppers. And that at first didn't gel with me very well because, as I said, my sponsor in NA was very adamant that poppers are not to be used. I followed that for 8, 9 months until I went separate ways with that sponsor. And and then I thought, you know what, I'll try it. I'm not gonna I'll try it. I'm in a safe situation, and I will. And I tried it, and it was good. Like exactly what poppers do, open you up, get back into it. It's sort of a bit easier. But there was the head spinning, the head rush, which was a memory of
Mm.
before. But one of the things that I found strange was that there are people who are sober who have been fisting for years, fist aficionados, sober for years as well. And I said, well, can we, while we're playing, can we? I'm not going to use poppers. And I was like, you can use poppers, that's fine. So when he was bottoming, he used poppers. And I said, why don't you try without? And there was just absolute look of fear on his face. He's like, I won't be able
Mm.
to do it. And I was like, I bet you will. I bet you will. I've got medium-sized hands. We'll talk through it. We'll pretend that you are not an absolute fisting expert, and we'll do it as if you're a complete beginner.
Mm.
Of course, it went in fine straight away. He was still able to do it, and it was. I remember his face afterwards. He was just like, "How and why have I never tried that before?" It just becomes a crutch that people rely on, and they think that it's part of fisting is using poppers, but it doesn't have to be. And that's something that I found quite interesting is the amount of people of people who still sort of cling on to poppers. And I've got nothing against them at all, and I do enjoy using them again now. But it's that idea of you still have to cling on to something else to be able to take a fist. The body can take an awful lot on its own.
Oh yes. Oh yes. I've definitely put my body through a lot of things. It's funny when you're talking about poppers, and it's something that comes up quite often when you become sober, is poppers under the category of relapse, and is it a part, are you actually sober if you use them? And in my book, this is my personal view, yes, you are. It's more a question of the reasons you're using them, how often do you use them, and how do they make you feel?
Yes.
If there is any alarm bells that go off whilst you're using them, then don't use them. But if you have a sniff once in a while and so on, you don't lose 2 years of sobriety because of that. But then again, that is my personal view. That is not everyone else's view. Like you mentioned, your first sponsor had a very specific view on that. And I've also been in meetings where it is in the text, including poppers. I personally think it can be dangerous to tell someone they've relapsed just because they use poppers.
I agree. I agree there. I think it's dangerous. It can be dangerous to say you have failed.
Mm.
More dangerous, yes, definitely. And it is something that needs to be we need to be mindful of when talking about it. But it's also something that comes up when people talk to me about it. People ask questions when they're asking questions about sobriety. One of them is about poppers and fisting, and then the other one is my other fetish, which is a large part of my sexuality, which is all to do with muscle growth and muscle growth fiction and comics, and it's all about like inhuman mass growing. And that's a huge part of me and myself, and it's only something that I've been able to explore sober in myself because it's to do with the idea of transformation. It's not to do with someone else doing anything to you or anything. It's all to do with the psychological feelings of thinking about transforming your body. So that is something I've been able to explore physically in myself because I've been able to put on a lot of weight because I'm eating a lot, because I'm sober, because I'm not in the state that I was before. So I've been able to follow bodybuilding journey. And part of that is taking steroids. Now, it's something that I have had a lot of reading on before,
Mm.
and some very good advice, some very poor advice, but some very good advice. And I felt able to do my first cycle, and I've gone on from there, and I'm now probably quite advanced with it with the cycles that I do myself. But that's a question that comes up like often, very often, is if you use steroids, are you sober?
Yeah.
And that's a question in itself that has put me of the opinion that in the same way of using poppers as a tool for fisting, steroids are a tool for muscle building. And my brain tries to categorize it into a very simple thing of if it messes with your mind, it's bad. If it's
Mm.
doing something for your body in a way that is not messing with the mind, then that is allowed. So that's my little rule on myself is steroids are there to be used in a medicinal way of altering the physiology of the body, and not to be used to cloud your judgment or to feel high for. And it's the same. I'm always on the lookout, and I've tried many brands of poppers and I would love some recommendations, if there are any, of specific brands of poppers that are just the bodily effects of opening the sphincter. And I've tried many that say they're not all to do with the head rush, etc. But they all do. But it would be my goal is to find one that just sort of affects the body and not the mind. But that's my little categorization of that.
No, do you know what? It's quite funny, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's a very good segue into the bodybuilding, of course, because that is something you do. Is literally, it'll probably be the last episode before yours. A guy called John was on, who's also a bodybuilder, and we also talked exactly about this thing. And he does the same thing as you. Does it mess with my head? If it
Yeah.
doesn't, fine. It's about checking in with yourself. It's the same. If I go to a club, I have to check in with myself. Am I going to the club for the right reason? Or
Mhm.
am I going there to get tempted? Sometimes I've stayed home because of that. And that's fine. If you do poppers, but for the wrong reasons, then you need to check yourself. If you do steroids in an say an unhealthy way, you have to be careful anyway if you're doing it healthy or not. You have to check in with yourself, and it's about keeping sane and keeping safe and healthy and so on. Anything can be done healthily and unhealthily with the mind.
It's also triggering as well, which is
Mm.
needles. That's a large part as well of what I get asked about, and it was not part of my using was needles. So that's something that I don't have experience on there, but I think that is also a big reason why people ask me when they don't know my whole story, but they know I'm sober. It's through Instagram mainly. This one would be questions is to do with steroids and the actual physical act of injecting the steroids is in itself problematic, of course.
Yeah, for a lot of sober people, that will be a problem. I struggle with needles now still. It's
Yeah.
it's it's blood tests and any injection like sedation and so on can be a massive trigger for me, and it can leave me quite panicked. It's not necessarily the action itself, maybe the run up to it can be, that's almost worse. Knowing that this is going to happen, that is almost worse for me. When it's over, it's fine, but it can also put ideas in my head afterwards, maybe a week later, if I don't check in with myself. So it is a tricky one, and it's how do you navigate that? So you are now taking a PhD?
Yes, I am. I'm studying in Department of Landscape and Architecture. So like I said before, I'm a landscape architect by profession, but I am currently studying cyclone protection in small island developing states. So how we can protect against hurricanes and cyclones using landscape features that would be easily built by the communities that are affected by them. So not having to wait for state intervention. That's what I'm doing.
Wow. Okay. How did you get land on wanting to study that?
Well, I had wanted to study it for a long time. It was part of my escape from London when I realized that my using was getting too much, and the first step, isn't it? You leave the situation thinking that that will be the fix. So what I did was go to the absolute opposite side of the world, and I went down to Vanuatu in the South Pacific and volunteered there for a couple of months and saw a cyclone and saw the effects of it. So it's always been in the back of my mind that these weather patterns can cause so much misery. But from my knowledge of being a landscape architect, there are so many things that you can do that are relatively simple in the grand scheme of things, like building ditches and dikes or planting trees around things that slow down the wind speeds or stop water inundation coming. So this has always been in my head. And then when I saw the effects of a hurricane, it literally devastated the island. So that's why I'm doing it. And being sober for long enough allowed me to write an application grant to go and get the funding to do it, and it was accepted on. So again, it was another, like you say, there was so many parts that just, there's like domino effect. All these things came together as soon as I was able to start controlling my life. So yeah, that was just another one. It's the PhD.
It's fantastic. This is like the porn, the relationship, PhD, the farm. It's just and it sounds so cliche, but for me, you are what I would call a success story. This is just like you stopped at the right time, you met the right people, you surrounded you with good people, and that is why it's so important.
It's still, and I'm incredibly grateful for this, and it is very important, but I am still not able to go to clubs like I said before, and there's still work, as we all know, needs to keep happening day in, day
Mm,
out. I am worried that it's all going to come crashing down,
mm.
because it was so life consuming before, and nothing else mattered, that it won't take long for it to get back to that state. So that's always in the back of my mind, and it is actually very good to talk to you now about this, just to have a little reminder again, another reminder of how much can happen when you look after yourself. Yeah.
So just to like wind a little bit back because I was a little bit curious and maybe I jumped subject too quickly. So you talk about your transformation, the bodybuilding fetish.
Yes.
Is there a goal with your bodybuilding? Do you want to compete?
No, I don't want to compete because I realize on myself that I like a bit of chunky muscle is how I describe it. So I do much prefer having a little bit of a belly on me. What I love and what is the basis of most of the fiction that I read, is to do with things like muscles growing to the point where you notice a difference in say movement of the arm or something like that, or mobility and things like this. So those things are things that are always in the back of my head. It's just like I just want to look like a freak, and I can make that happen myself, and I can do that, and I can change my body. It's all part of the same. I don't know. It's probably. I feel like it could be part of the same fetish in the way that I know that my body can take a lot from being fisted and being double fisted, and I can do that. That's fine. I know that I can take a lot of pain from play sessions. I know that I love piercings, and I've stretched out a lot of my piercings all over my body, and my PA is now nearly too big that I need to calm that down. Um, and the next step is just to keep going with the body and the muscles themselves. And I can keep changing my body and keep fetishizing myself. But also, this is what I love is the fact that I can just sort of close it all off for the afternoon and go into research and do my research. And then in the evening, I can go and get I can request to have my cock cage taken off for the evening and have a little play session. So these things are all parts of the facets of life, aren't they? That I think that muscle growth, body modification in itself in the form of stretches, that's what I like. And fisting are all linked together in my mind and in the fetish world.
It's definitely fascinating. I got my nose piercing this summer. For anyone listening, you can't see it because you're listening, but I tried. I got a stretching kit myself, and I
Oh,
have
did you?
the following nose rings, and I'm going from 2 mils to 2.4, and I
Oh,
was like, that should be easy enough.
so painful.
No, 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 no. I've talked to my peers, and as soon as he's in London next time, he's doing it for me. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it.
Mm. No, and mine's 4 mil at the moment. And what I did was ended up when I was because in the state of New York, it's legal, and I think there's a couple of other states in America where it's legal. You can have a skin punch, so it's like a hole punch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was just put through because I couldn't deal with the pain of the stretching. And that was something that I did not enjoy was that act of pushing the stretcher through. With the nose, it was something different. It's not like the ears and it's not like the dick. It didn't feel the same. The nose was very painful.
Thank you. You're helping me here now. Well, we are coming to the end of our time already, and it's actually been such a joy to talk to you, and you feel very in contact with what you want and what you want out of your sobriety. Just to end the conversation on just the curiosity and so on. So when did you get diagnosed with autism?
Was in February or March this year was the process. It was something that I had been directed to by friends before. I think they'd had enough of me being rude, but also it was in a very depressive state that I was in, and I just didn't know what was happening. And the doctor, who I had a really good GP. I was very lucky there with the NHS. I had a very good GP who
Mm.
recommended me forward, and it took a long time to get the diagnosis, but it was in March this year, and it's what, December now, so we've had a good 3/4 of a year for it to sink in, and it has been really quite transformative to be able to look back on so many things and so many the reasonings for why I got myself into that situation or why I ended up like getting high, I think was a way of socializing, was dealing with things when I was much younger, and it was a social interaction when all my friends were not getting high for that specific evening. I'd be like, oh well, I still need it. I can realize why I thought that I needed it as well before the addiction started, before I actually needed it. So many parts, and also with play, it has. I'm not asexual. I'm not a freak, which is what I always thought. I just couldn't deal with people. I didn't know how to talk about it. And this has been one of the absolute benefits, I think, of it being promoted is not the word, talked about neurodiversity because you realize that there are answers for all of the things that you did. And that's something that has really let me enjoy my entrance into the kink world in the last 2 years. And especially in the last year, I've been able, in the last 8 months or so, because of this diagnosis, I've been able to categorize, which is what my brain loves doing. I've been able to categorize why I like these short play sessions where I've got instructions about what we need to capture, what we need to film, and then we go off onto do a different scene and we do a different thing. And my brain can process this in a way that is really, really healthy.
It's interesting because I got diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years back, and that was also quite like transformative in the way I think, the way I react to how my brain reacts to things. I did try to get an autism diagnosis. The reply was, it's not severe enough to be diagnosed. Which I was just like, okay, fine, that's okay. I know it's there, but it's not they kind of said all the negative things I might have is not because I have autism or maybe I don't have autism. It's more to do with the ADHD. So they
But
didn't.
was this recently?
Yeah, it was recently. Yeah. So it was just it would have been nice to get the diagnosis as well or get a proper diagnosis so you kind of get an idea. But I always kind of like I have diagnosed ADHD and undiagnosed autism. I'm definitely neurospicy on that
There
level.
is
And to
spicy,
be
yeah.
honest, I find on the kink scene there's so much neurodiversity.
Yes.
It's quite mind-blowing, especially when now we are kind of in the know and we know our diagnosis and so on. We kind of go, yeah,
Yeah. Oh.
you're definitely, and you too.
And also within the sober kink world, then it's just the massive majority because there's so much neurodiversity will lead into addiction, and
Mm,
within the small world of sober kink, then there is so much neurodiversity there, and that's why everyone gets on as well, is because it's always been about how there's all these stories of neurodivergence getting on with each other and able to to bounce off each other is something that I recognize with as well. So I can
yeah.
feel pain.
Well, I met you the first time at Darklands, which was really lovely, but I got to know you a little bit better when we did the sober dinner at Folsom. And that was really lovely. And what stood out with me was you thanking me for a lovely, gentle start. And I was
Hmm.
like, do you know what? I fully get that notion of coming to a really busy event and you kind of want something that's a little bit more sedate before you start, like the big event. So that really stuck out for me, and I really appreciated that at the time because those dinners were such a success. And
Yes.
if I do Folsom next year, I'll definitely do them again because I think it really worked with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think they're a really, really good thing that you planned, and I think it was very successful. And like I said before about my first experience with Folsom the year before was coming off the plane from New York into a club, into a sex show, and it was just the complete opposite. So having a calm opening up to the weekend, but then able to get excited about what's going to happen by talking to everyone around you, still meeting new people at the dinner
Mm,
and still being sociable, but not in any stressful environment. The food was great, fantastic German food. I loved it.
yeah, well, it's meat on a plate. How can you go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And I love,
I help you with your protein intake that day.
oh yeah, and I got a lot of protein intake that whole weekend.
I bet you did. I bet you did. So now we're finally coming to the proper ending of the episode. If anyone's listened or watched and they're really connected with something you've said around sobriety, neurodivergence, even maybe your PhD, and they want some advice, where can they get a hold of you?
I would say probably the best thing would be on Instagram. So it's Rock Bigs on Instagram. And Twitter as well. The messaging, direct messaging on Twitter always comes through to me. So that's Rock Bigs on Twitter as well.
Fantastic. And just to round the episode off, is there any piece of advice you would like to pass on to someone maybe listening and watching that can be related to anything we've talked about?
I would say that you can take that fist sober.
Amen to that. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Rock Biggs this week, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to him about sobriety, fisting, any typhoon safeguarding big buildings. It's been so lovely, and you can just feel that joy, especially when he talks about fisting. So it's been absolutely lovely to have him on. I'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next episode. Go out and be safe, play, have fun, do it sober, and you can do fisting without poppers. You have the Rock Biggs announcement on that. So, bye.